Thank you very much, Yehuda, for your kind introduction. Just to add, I'm also now an adjunct professor at Georgetown University. That's fine. But, this is an academic community, so this is important. I want to thank Ron for the important work with this Institute for Tolerance and Studies. I believe that the topic of my presentation today is very relevant to the work that you do and the mission of the organization. Special thanks to our very dear friends again, Yehuda and Nurit, where are you, for initiating our visit, for your friendship, and for the very warm hospitality. The relations today between Judaism and the Catholic Church are excellent. They are the best that they have been in 2000 years. We can certainly say that we live in the golden age of Jewish-Catholic relations. Pope Francis is a great friend of the Jewish people. Today there is an ongoing, warm, open, friendly dialogue at various levels. In one of our recent meetings, Pope Francis jokingly told me, "You know, Mr. Ambassador, they say that I meet more Jewish groups than Catholic groups. Every time I went to a meeting in the Vatican, past the Swiss guards and crossed the beautiful marble floors, I thought about the long road we Jews and Christians have traveled, especially in the past 50 years, from enmity to brotherhood, from rejection and denial to acceptance and respect. Every time I visited the Arch of Titus in Rome, I looked at the tortured faces of the enslaved Jews engraved in the stone. The Jews were brought to Rome together with the treasures from the Holy Temple. As the official representative of the State of Israel, the independent State of Israel, I could not help but think about the phrase in Hebrew, Am Yisrael Chai, which means the Jewish people live. I would like to mention the milestones of this revolution in the Catholic Church's position toward the Jewish people. Two events that took place 110 years apart symbolize this change. In 1904, Theodor Herzl, the founder of modern Zionism, in efforts to get support for the idea of a Jewish state in Palestine, met in the Vatican with Pope Pius X. He asked him for his support for the idea of a Jewish homeland in Palestine. The Pope rejected his request on theological grounds, saying, "You refuse to accept Jesus as the Messiah, we can never support your aspiration to establish a homeland in Palestine." Fast forward 110 years later, 2014. During his official visit to Israel, Pope Francis visited Mount Herzl and laid a wreath on Herzl's tomb. So these two events symbolize the significant historic change in the position of the Catholic Church toward the Jewish people and the State of Israel. How did this happen? I'll try to explain briefly. After the Holocaust, a poignant process of introspection and soul-searching began at the Catholic Church to understand in what way and how the Catholic Church's teaching contributed to the hatred toward the Jews, to anti-Semitism. In this regard, Pope John XXIII was Pope from 1958 to 1963, was a transformative figure in Jewish Catholic relations, no less than in the history of the Church itself. He played a courageous role in rescuing Jews during the Holocaust when he was apostolic delegate in Turkey, and it was his recognition of the need to revise what the Jewish French philosopher and educator Jules Isaac called in his book the teaching of contempt, the contempt of Catholics toward the Jews. and basically based on the accusation of deicide, accusing the Jews of the killing of Jesus. In a first meeting with the Jewish group, he said to them, when he greeted them, "It is I, Joseph, your brother." You all know the biblical story, so I don't have to elaborate on it. In 1965, and this is 2 years after he passed away, of course, by the original initiative and audacity of Pope John the 23rd, Pope Paul VI and the Catholic Church adopted a very important document called Nostra Aetate, in Latin, which meaning in our time. These are the opening words of the document. This was part of Vatican II, which was Vatican II Council, which was the gathering of all the bishops and archbishops around the world, about 3,000. They all gathered in Rome, on and off for about 2 years. So this document, Nostra Aetate, one of 16 adopted by Vatican II, exonerated the Jewish people from the collective blame for the death of Jesus, a source that has been the source of religious anti-Semitism for 2,000 years. The document also says that the covenant between the Jewish people and God is still valid, and it rejects any form of hatred and anti-Semitism. The document was supported by 2,232 of those attending the gathering, Catholic bishops, and only 88 rejected. So this was the first major historic event in the transformation of the position of the Catholic Church toward the Jewish people. And then there were other milestones. In 1986, Pope John Paul II continued the transformation of the relations by visiting the Great Synagogue of Rome, the first visit ever of a pope in a synagogue. In his speech, he referred to the Jewish people, saying, quote, "You are our dearly beloved brothers. And in a certain way, it could be said that you are our elder brothers." End of quote. The next milestone was in 1993, the signing of the fundamental agreement between Israel and the Vatican. It included recognition, establishment of diplomatic relations, exchange of ambassadors, and a commitment to cooperate in combating anti-Semitism. Israel, of course, affirmed its commitment to maintain the status quo in the holy places in Israel. Later, I will elaborate on the state of relations today between Israel and the Vatican. In the year 2000, the historic visit of Pope John Paul II, first official visit of a pope in Israel. Pope Paul VI visited in 1964, but only for 11 hours, without any official meeting. And at the end of the meeting, he sent a telegram addressed Mr. President Shazar, Tel Aviv. So this time, an official visit, including all that it is included in an official visit, and including, of course, a visit to the Western Wall, the Wailing Wall, where he put the traditional note in it. And this note is very significant, and it reads, quote, "God of our fathers, we are deeply saddened by the behavior of those who in the course of history have caused these children of yours to suffer, and asking your forgiveness." End of quote. Forgiveness is the key word in this note, and with historic importance. This is what the Jewish people have been waiting to hear. In 2009, the visit of Pope Benedict in Israel, and in 2014, Pope Francis, including the visit to Mount Herzl that I mentioned before. Pope Francis brought the relationship to a higher level in a number of ways. He speaks strongly and often against anti-Semitism. He said recently, for example, quote, "A Christian cannot be an anti-Semite because of his Jewish roots." Regarding the state of Israel, he said, "Anybody that does not recognize the right of the Jewish people in the state of Israel to exist is an anti-Semite." He speaks with admiration and love about the Jewish people and the fact that they have kept their belief in God in spite of the Holocaust. He visited the synagogue a number of times before he became a pope in Argentina. And his best friend is a rabbi, Abraham Skorka from Buenos Aires. Together they wrote the book On Heaven and Earth. On another occasion he said, "The relationship with the Jewish people is very close to my heart. We are strangers no more, but friends and brothers and sisters." Initially, many Jewish leaders were skeptical, especially from the Orthodox community, about the sincerity of the Church's overtures, due to the long history of Christian anti-Judaism, actually. Over time, it has become clear, though, that the transformation of the Church attitude and teaching are sincere and profound. We entered a new era of tolerance, mutual respect, and solidarity between our faith. However, both Catholics and Jews acknowledge that doctrinal differences and profound, irreconcilable theological differences between Judaism and Christianity exist. They will not go away. But these differences have not stood in the way of friendship and collaboration in the struggle for shared values like sanctity of life, religious freedom, social justice, and more. And, of course, the struggle against anti-Semitism, racism, and especially terrorism and violence in the name of God. False claim of the name of God. The first Jewish response came in 2000, a document titled Dabru Emet, which in Hebrew means speak the truth, signed by 220 rabbis and intellectuals of all branches of Judaism. The purpose of the document was to point out to common ground and the legitimacy of Christianity for Jews from a Jewish perspective. In the most recent document, published in 2017 by a group of Orthodox rabbis in response to the document, the basic Catholic document Nostra Aetate, and it is important because it was unofficially approved by the chief rabbinate in Israel. They applauded the new position of the Catholic Church and welcomed continued dialogue. They echoed Pope Francis' comment, "From enemies and strangers, we have become friends and brothers." Nostra Aetate shows that interreligious dialogue is always possible, even when there are doctrinal and fundamental differences. It does not mean giving up one's own religious identity. It is an enriching value because it dynamically makes a connection between diversities. It helps abolish false images of each other and it strengthens one's own identity. It helps build bridges of understanding and tolerance, very relevant to the name of the organization here, and peace, where and when politicians fail. Now, a few brief comments about Israel's relations with the Vatican. I was the 6th Israeli ambassador to the Vatican, and sometimes asked, "What do you do as an ambassador to the Vatican? Do you live in the Vatican?" And my answer was that I see myself as ambassador to the Catholic world, with 1.2 billion believers who see the Pope as their spiritual leader and moral authority. Many Israelis I met asked me if I searched and saw the menorah, the 7-branch candelabra that was brought to Rome after the destruction of the temple in Jerusalem in 70 AD, and you can see on the Arch of Titus. And according to legend, it is still hidden somewhere in the Vatican basement. Well, after 4 years, I'm sorry to tell you that I did not find it. Let's see. And I think we'll leave it to Dan Brown and Steven Spielberg. Although the Vatican does not have any army, maybe with the exception of the Swiss Guards, and does not have trade relation, it is a state represented in international organization, and it is very important, of course, what the Pope publicly says. My job was to create more understanding for Israel's position and its unique circumstances, to expand cultural and academic ties and tourism to Israel, and to be involved in the Jewish-Catholic dialogue. Israel-Vatican relations are unique because theological issues between two religions, Judaism and Christianity, and political interests between two states, the State of Israel and the Vatican, are intertwined. The relations today are good. There is, however, much much room for improvement. Briefly, what are the interests of each sides? The issues that dominated the relationship. From a Vatican's point of view, the most important is to conclude and sign the financial economic agreement that guarantees the rights of the Catholic Church in the holy places and solve issues of taxation, to protect the rights of the Christian communities in Israel, especially in the West Bank and mainly around Bethlehem, and to stop the demographic decline of the Catholic community in the Holy Land. Progress in the peace process between Israel and the Palestinians is another important interest, and of course they would like to be involved in any final future agreement between Israel and the Palestinians, if it ever happens, especially concerning Jerusalem. For Israel, the most important interests are to get public support from the Pope on important issues like Iran and its cause for Israel's destruction and denial of the Holocaust, to expand the political dialogue, which is now very limited, and start a dialogue between us and the Vatican on many other issues, and to continue the cooperation on fighting anti-Semitism. As for the future, the challenges we face in Jewish-Catholic dialogue in Israel-Vatican relation. First of all, to continue together the struggle against anti-Semitism, which is still alive and well. Anti-Semitism has a different face and character in every generation. It will never go away. We have to continue and intensify the education of Catholics and of other Christian denominations about Judaism and the special importance of Israel in Jewish self-identity. We are facing a huge educational challenge to spread the message of Nostra Aetate. The Jews are not responsible for the killing of Jesus. There are still parts of the Catholic world where pre-Vatican II attitudes still prevail and where anti-Jewish views still can be found. The teaching of Nostra Aetate must be part of the syllabus wherever priests are educated. There is, of course, a parallel challenge on the Jewish side. Not exactly symmetrical because of history, but we have to educate Jewish communities and Israelis about the new position of the Church. And so people understand that Vatican II is not the summer home of the Pope, but it is an important document. We have to continue calling on other Christian denominations to follow the steps of the Catholic Church, especially the Orthodox Church, and to delete all anti-Jewish references in their prayer books and hymns. To continue together the work of Tikkun Olam, make our world better and expand the interfaith dialogue to other religions and other issues beyond the issues discussed today. For example, to get the support of interfaith dialogue of religious leaders in conflict resolution. Sometimes when politicians fail, religious leaders can build bridges of understanding, like for example to solve the conflict in Northern Ireland. Also, religious leaders can raise a loud and clear voice about the dangers facing the existing world order in our global community, nuclear proliferation, the environment, and the use of violence in the name of God or some other ideology. Pope Francis has done so constantly. In Israel-Vatican relations, we must double our efforts to conclude and sign the financial economic negotiations about church property in Israel and issues of taxation. These negotiations have been going on indeed for too long, for almost 20 years, on and off. Someone said, what is 20 years in 2000 years history, but still. This would be another important milestone in the relations between Israel and the Vatican, and indirectly will have important implications on Jewish-Catholic relations. I hope that this agreement be signed during my tenure there. It didn't happen. Anyway, so we can see the challenges are still huge and much work remains to be done. Old views and beliefs, false images and stereotypes die hard. But we have to continue our efforts until we reach the desired destination and the task is done. Thank you for it, and I'm open for your comments and questions. Let me just say that I'm retired Israeli ambassador. I no longer represent the government of Israel officially, and the views that I express here are my personal views.
Any questions?
If you have answers, I'm ready to.
So you posed a question. Yes, please.
I was wondering if you felt personally conflict being in the Vatican with the dichotomy of two religions, bringing their energy and your energy in common.
I was received very warmly. I always thought about the long road that we have traveled together, Jews and Catholics, since biblical times, and even, as I mentioned, Theodor Herzl. And I think the energy together was positive. We, of course, did not agree on everything. There is a great desire by the Vatican to complete this agreement. This is a sore point in the relations. And I do hope that we find we'll be creative and put our heads together. We are almost there. We have made great progress, and that we signed this agreement, which is very important for both. It is in Israel's interest and the Vatican's interest. I saw great readiness to cooperate in fighting anti-Semitism, and I saw much friendship, especially from Pope Francis, that comes from the heart, not just because of maybe it's politically correct, about the Judaism, Jewish people, and the interest in interfaith dialogue, the importance of interfaith dialogue. Yes, this is a very good question. Just recently, about a few months ago, the Pope decided to open the archives about the period of the Second War, 1939 to 45, and the during the time that Pope Pius XII was the Pope. Generally, the Vatican archive is open to researchers. I think you have to apply and the permission is given. Obviously not everything is open. Only recently they agreed to open the documents of the covering the period of the Pope Pius XII. This was an issue of disagreement between the Jewish community and the Vatican for a long period of time, because it's related somehow to the Vatican's intention and wish to grant Pope Pius XII sainthood, and the Jewish community, especially in Rome, maintain that we have to get to the truth of that period before any progress is made on this issue of sainthood to Pius XII. And to get to the historical truth, the archives have to be open to historians, and this is a decision that the Pope made just a few months ago, which is a positive move.
Marsha, go ahead.
You had mentioned the priorities of the Vatican and of Israel, and there was no overlap between those priorities going forward. Has the Vatican done anything in terms of helping Israel address the Iranian threat?
We have, of course, asked the Vatican the Pope to make public statements about the calls for Israel's destruction, the denial of the Holocaust. Such statements were made by the Vatican, but the Vatican still has a nuncio, an ambassador in Tehran. The Vatican obviously doesn't have trade relations with Iran, so all we can ask is for the Pope's moral support on it. And I think that anything that is related to denial of the Holocaust, we have the Pope's position is very clear.
Vivian. Yes.
As far as anti-Semitism is concerned, the fact that the Catholic Church has disavowed us as being responsible for the death of Jesus, how is that manifested ongoing in the Catholic community? I mean, how does it show up? How does it...
In a number of ways. Ongoing dialogue between various Jewish and Catholic groups at various levels. There is a dialogue, official dialogue between the Vatican and the chief rabbinate in Israel. There's a dialogue between an umbrella organization of Jewish groups and the Catholic Church. In a number of countries, there are joint events by the local Catholic community and the Jewish community to learn more about Jewish culture. It's a long way, and there's much more that can be done. I agree with you. We have to continue our efforts to educate priests, because they are the ones who go everywhere and preach to their communities. And generally speaking, I think the message got through, but there's still much work to be done.
Yeah.
Yes, I'm Joel Hopko. I do adult religious education for the Archdiocese of Santa Fe and the local deanery of Santa Fe.
Welcome.
And thank you. It's a privilege to be here. You're the highest member of the Israeli government I've ever had the opportunity to converse directly with. So that's a wonderful opportunity for me. I'd like to say that I can point to several positive things that are the result of, as it will, the détente, or the opening up of Catholic-Jewish relations.
Yes.
We have begun, and Pope Francis is very much in light with this, of honoring the Jewish tradition of not naming the Almighty by name, instead referring to Adonai, or Lord. And so we've taken various steps along those lines. And of course, I'd like to say that Nostra Aetate represented an enormous advance because John the 23rd had the courage to let go of fear and millennia of prejudice and open up. And I would like to ask you if you think there will be a kind of letting go of fear and opening up on the part of Israel as well.
Oh, thank you. That's a very good question. Recently, a book was published. Some efforts are being made, especially by the American Jewish Committee, to publish a book in Hebrew about Jewish perception of Christianity and about the change taking place in the Catholic Church. I think we have to continue our efforts in educate Israelis, especially Orthodox Jews in Israel, about this change. All I can say that there's much more that can be done in this regard. But the fear, the history, there's no symmetry in the history for obvious reasons. For 2,000 years, Jews were on the receiving end of violence and treatment, and so this ingrained fear exists for many years. So, but let's speak about the positive. The fact that every meeting that I participated, where there was a dialogue, I saw friendship and warmth and understanding and openness and looking for the common ground and what we share rather than what divides us. And in this spirit, I think we have to continue rather than look about differences and the painful past, to look at the hopeful future. And how we can transform this good and fruitful dialogue between Judaism and the Catholic Church to other denominations, to include the Orthodox Church and other denominations and maybe the Muslim community, and how to take this tool of interfaith dialogue to help us all heal from all what is happening around us, the terrorism and the hatred and intolerance and people with extreme ideologies, people that think that God gave them the right to take other people's lives. And use interfaith dialogue to solve conflicts around the world, as it was done in Northern Ireland. There are groups in Israel that try to use interreligious dialogue to bring Palestinians and Israelis together, and I think it's done in other places. Pope Francis himself was involved in bringing peace to the peace agreement that achieved in Colombia, I believe, and the opening of the re-establishment of, if you can call it re-establishment of relations between the United States and Cuba. He's a man of peace, and a great friend of the Jewish people, and great charisma, and I think hopefully we can use this tool of interfaith dialogue together to go beyond the dialogue between Catholics and Jews. Thank you for your comments.
Thank you, Ahmed.
Yes, please.
I have a question regarding Catholicism and heaven and hell, and I'll tell you a short story, right?
Yes, I understand the comment. Let me
I don't think they knew.
Let me tell you that I understand your comment because it brings me to something important that I want to mention. That one of the issues of disagreement in the dialogue between Jews and Catholics was the issue of salvation, because the Catholic Church believes that you can get to salvation only through Jesus. Is this correct? And then,
Subject to, well, they're.
without making, I'm simplifying it, but you cannot receive salvation without believing in Jesus. And this was an issue because in the dialogue with the Jews said, this is unacceptable. But by saying this, you mean the Jews cannot receive salvation. So the change in the position of the most recent change in a document published in 2015 by Cardinal Koch, he's the most senior person in the Vatican who signed the document, that although the Catholic Church has not changed its teaching about salvation, Jews can still get salvation. Salvation is possible in other ways. How is it possible? It was solved in a very typical Jewish way. We leave it for God. So no, I'm mentioning it because I'm touching on one of the issues, sensitive issues of conversion and salvation, were two of the main issues in recent years of disagreement between Jews and Catholics, trying to reach together. This was an issue of disagreement and frustration on the Jewish part, and also the issue of conversion was resolved by the Catholic Church clarifying that the Jews are not subject to conversion, and the evangelization is not specifically targeted toward the Jews, and this removed another issue of I would say bad feeling, disagreement. So thank you for your comment, but so now we all can receive salvation.
I think that is a good point to finish this, unless there are some.
Okay. Thank you very much. Thank you.